The day I returned to American soil should have been marked by celebration. 40 years of service to my country, countless medals decorating my uniform, and the respect of every man under my command. I stepped off that military transport at Fort Braden with my head held high, my officer's cap perfectly positioned, just as regulations demanded. Even at 65, I stood straight-backed and proud, despite the old shrapnel wound in my left leg that ached with the changing weather. The younger soldiers saluted as I passed. They didn't need to. I was technically on leave before my official retirement, but respect is earned in the military, not freely given. I remember checking my watch as I collected my belongings. It was 1400 hours. Eleanor wasn't expecting me for another 2 days. I had completed my final mission ahead of schedule, pushing my men just a little harder so I could surprise my wife of 4 decades. 40 years of marriage, most of it spent apart while I served wherever my country needed me. Desert storms, jungle operations, mountain warfare. I had seen it all, survived it all, always with the thought of returning to Mitchell Manor, to the manicured lawn and white columns that represented everything I had worked for. The taxi driver recognized my uniform as I loaded my single duffel bag into his car outside the base. "Oh, where to, General?" he asked, eyeing my insignia with appropriate deference. "Oakridge," I replied. "212 Maple Avenue." He nodded, pulling away from the curb. "Coming home for good this time, sir." I allowed myself a small smile. Yes, for good. The drive through Virginia's countryside was peaceful. Spring had painted the landscape in vibrant greens and blossoming colors. We passed through small towns where American flags hung from porches, where people still believed in the values I had spent my life defending. I felt a profound sense of completion, my duty to my country fulfilled, and now, finally, time to fulfill my duty to my wife. Eleanor and I had met when we were both barely out of high school. She was studying to become a teacher. I was a newly commissioned officer with ambitions of serving at the highest levels. We married quickly, perhaps too quickly, before my first deployment. Our early years were difficult, months apart, reunions that felt like meeting a stranger, learning to love each other all over again during my brief leaves. But we persevered. She taught at the local elementary school while I climbed the ranks. We never had children. Eleanor had complications early on, but we had built a life nonetheless, a respected life in Oakridge. As we approached the town limits, I asked the driver to stop at a small florist shop. I selected a bouquet of red roses, Eleanor's favorite, and continued my journey home. The taxi wound through the familiar streets of Oakridge, past the Veterans Memorial Park, where my name was engraved on a plaque honoring the town's highest-ranking officers, past St. Mary's Church, where we had exchanged our vows in 1984, past the Riverside Country Club, where the military balls were held whenever I returned home. "Just drop me at the corner," I instructed the driver as we neared Maple Avenue. I wanted to walk the final stretch, to savor this moment of homecoming, to surprise Eleanor properly. I paid the fare, added a generous tip, and stood on the sidewalk of my neighborhood with my duffel bag at my feet and roses in hand. The houses here were stately, colonial-style homes with history and character. Mitchell Manor stood 6 houses down, its blue exterior and white trim visible even from this distance. I picked up my bag and began the walk home, nodding to Mrs. Turner, who was gardening in her front yard. "General Mitchell!" she exclaimed, dropping her trowel. "We weren't expecting you until Thursday. Thought I'd surprise Eleanor," I replied with a smile that felt genuine. Martha Turner had been our neighbor for 30 years. She had kept an eye on Eleanor during my longer deployments, invited her to dinner parties so she wouldn't be alone. "How lovely," Martha said, but there was something in her expression, a flicker of something I couldn't quite identify. Concern, embarrassment. She quickly resumed her gardening, avoiding further eye contact. I continued down the street, my military instinct suddenly alert. Something wasn't right. I had spent decades reading terrain, assessing threats, sensing ambushes before they occurred. The same instinct that had saved my life in Kandahar was now sending warning signals through my body. As I approached Mitchell Manor, I noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway alongside Eleanor's blue sedan. A black BMW with custom rims, ostentatious, expensive. Not the kind of vehicle my friends would drive. I slowed my pace, decades of tactical training taking over. Instead of approaching from the front, I circled around through the Henderson property next door, keeping to the cover of their large oak trees. Our backyard was immaculate as always. Eleanor's rose garden in full bloom, the patio furniture arranged perfectly, the American flag flying from the pole I had installed after my promotion to colonel. The curtains were drawn in the living room, unusual for Eleanor, who loved natural light. But the kitchen windows were clear, and as I approached, I could see movement inside. I set my duffel bag silently on the grass and moved closer to the window, roses still clutched in my left hand. Through the glass, I saw Eleanor at the kitchen island, laughing as she poured wine into 2 crystal glasses, the Waterford set we had received as a wedding gift. She looked beautiful at 62, her blonde hair now silver but still styled elegantly, her figure still slim from her daily tennis matches at the country club. But she wasn't alone. Derek stepped into view, taking one of the wine glasses from her hand. My nephew, my sister's son, who I had helped raise after her death from cancer 15 years ago. Derek, who I had put through business school, who I had secured loans for when he started Callahan Enterprises, who called me Uncle Ray and sent me letters during my deployments. I watched as he leaned in to kiss Eleanor, not the kiss of family, but of lovers. His hand slid around her waist with familiar ease. She didn't resist. She responded, setting down her wine to wrap her arms around his neck. The roses fell from my hand onto the grass. 40 years of marriage. 40 years of sending home my salary, of calling when satellite phones were available, of fighting not just for my country, but for the life we had built together. 40 years of fidelity, despite temptations during long deployments, of declining posts that might have advanced my career further because Eleanor didn't want to leave Oakridge. I didn't confront them then. A lifetime in military intelligence had taught me the value of information, of knowing your enemy's position before engaging. I retreated silently, collected my duffel bag, and walked away from Mitchell Manor. They never knew I had been there. That night I checked into a small hotel on the outskirts of town and lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind, trained to analyze and strategize, began to form a plan, not a hasty assault, but a calculated operation. Eleanor and Derek had declared war on me in the most personal way possible. And if it was war they wanted, they would soon learn that they had challenged the wrong man. I thought of all those years away, fighting for people I would never meet, defending values that seemed increasingly rare in this world. I had expected enemies abroad. I never thought I would find them in my own home. But as the first light of dawn broke through the cheap hotel curtains, I made a decision. This would be my final mission. And like every mission I had ever led, failure was not an option. I spent that first night planning my approach. I'd led enough covert operations to know that rushing in with guns blazing, metaphorically speaking, would only compromise my position. The military had taught me patience. In the mountains of Afghanistan, I once had my unit wait 3 days in freezing conditions to confirm intelligence before striking. This situation called for the same discipline. The next morning, I called Colonel James Patterson. James and I had served together for 30 years, from junior officers to our current ranks. He'd been stationed at Fort Braden for the past 5 years, overseeing training operations while I continued field deployments. If anyone would give me honest intelligence, it would be James. "Ray," he answered on the 3rd ring, his voice carrying that familiar gruff warmth. "Thought you weren't due back until Thursday." "Plans changed," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Can we meet? Privately?" There was a pause on the line, brief but noticeable to someone who had known the man for decades. "The fishing spot?" he suggested, referring to a quiet section of the Oakridge River where we'd spent countless hours during my leaves. "1 hour," I confirmed, and ended the call. The riverside was peaceful that morning, mist still rising off the water as the spring sun climbed higher. James was already there when I arrived, sitting on the weathered bench overlooking the slow-moving current. He stood as I approached, and we exchanged the firm handshake of men who have faced death together. "You know," I said simply. It wasn't a question. James's eyes, which had stared down enemy combatants without flinching, couldn't meet mine. "Suspected," he corrected, "but didn't confirm until last Christmas party at the officers' club. Saw them outside in the parking lot. Too close, too familiar." He finally looked at me directly. "Didn't know how to tell you while you were deployed. Didn't want to compromise your focus in the field." I nodded, appreciating his military reasoning, while a part of me wished for the courtesy of earlier knowledge. "How long, in your estimation?" "At least 2 years, maybe longer." 2 years, during which I'd been deployed to 3 different conflict zones, been awarded another commendation, attended strategy meetings with the Joint Chiefs, during which I'd called home weekly when communications allowed, sent portions of my salary to our joint account, written actual letters because Eleanor claimed to prefer them to emails. "Who else knows?" I asked, my mind already calculating the social terrain of Oakridge. "Martha Turner definitely suspects something. Chief Donovan might. His son works valet at the country club, mentioned seeing them there when you were overseas. Most others either don't know or pretend not to out of respect for you." I absorbed this information silently, watching a blue heron wade into the shallows downstream. The bird struck with sudden precision, emerging with a fish in its beak. Nature's reminder that patience and timing yield results. "What are you planning to do?" James finally asked. "Nothing, yet." I stood, straightening my civilian clothes with the same attention I'd give to a uniform. "For now, I'm going home to surprise my wife." James looked alarmed. "Ray, if you're I'm thinking of behaving exactly as a returning officer should," I interrupted calmly, "with dignity and control." 3 hours later, I walked through the front door of Mitchell Manor, timing my arrival for when I knew both Eleanor and Derek would be out. Eleanor taught piano lessons to neighborhood children on Tuesday afternoons, and Derek would be at Callahan Enterprises until evening, according to the company website I'd checked. The house smelled faintly of Eleanor's perfume, Chanel No. 5, the same scent she'd worn since our honeymoon. I moved through the familiar rooms, noting small changes made during my absence. New curtains in the living room, a different arrangement of photographs on the mantel. Fewer of me in uniform, I noticed, more of community events where Eleanor stood prominently with her Arts Council friends. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, each step feeling like ascending toward an inevitable confrontation. The master suite was immaculate as always. Eleanor couldn't tolerate disorder. The king-sized bed was perfectly made, decorative pillows arranged with mathematical precision. I set my duffel bag on the cedar chest at the foot of the bed and opened the closet door. My section remained untouched, civilian clothes still hanging with exactly the space between hangers that I preferred. Military precision, Eleanor used to tease. On her side, the designer dresses and tailored slacks hung in color-coordinated sections. I reached to the back of her closet, feeling along the top shelf where she kept gift boxes and seasonal items. My fingers found what I was searching for, a small metal case about the size of a paperback book, the lockbox where I kept spare keys, emergency cash, and a flash drive with important documents. I pulled it down and entered the combination, our wedding date. Inside, beneath the papers, was a small device no larger than a quarter, a wireless camera with a battery life of several months. I had first installed similar surveillance equipment in our home 10 years ago after a break-in, while Eleanor was alone during my deployment to Iraq. The security system was meant to protect her, to give me peace of mind while thousands of miles away. I had shown her the cameras in common areas, living room, kitchen, main hallway, but kept 1 or 2 discrete backup devices to myself. Professional paranoia perhaps, but paranoia had kept me alive in hostile territories. I activated the camera and placed it strategically on the bookshelf in our bedroom, angled to capture most of the room while remaining virtually invisible among the knickknacks and family photos. I repeated this process in the living room and kitchen, using my military training to identify optimal surveillance positions. Not to catch them in the act, I had already seen enough, but to gather intelligence, conversations, plans, financial discussions. By the time I heard Eleanor's car in the driveway, I had composed myself completely, unpacked my bag, and was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, a newspaper open before me as if I'd been home for days. The look on her face when she walked through the door carrying sheet music and saw me sitting there was worth every moment of my covert preparation. Shock, fear, guilt, all flashing across her features before being replaced by a mask of delight. "Raymond!" she exclaimed, dropping her music sheets on the counter and rushing toward me with outstretched arms. "You're early. Why didn't you call?" I stood and embraced her, feeling the stiffness in her body despite her performance of joy. "Wanted to surprise you," I said, kissing her cheek chastely. She smelled different up close, not just her Chanel, but something else. Derek's cologne, perhaps. "You certainly did," she laughed, the sound slightly too high-pitched. "I would have prepared something special if I'd known." "No need," I assured her, releasing her from our embrace. "I thought we could go to dinner at Riverside tonight, celebrate my return." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. "Tonight? I already made plans with the Arts Council, the spring fundraiser planning meeting." She hesitated, then added, "I can cancel, of course." "Don't change your plans on my account," I said generously. "I know how important your community work is. We'll celebrate tomorrow." Relief flooded her face. "Are you sure? You must be exhausted from your journey." "I'm fine. Actually, I might call Derek, see if he wants to grab a drink, catch up with my nephew." I watched her carefully as I mentioned his name. Her hand fluttered to her necklace, a nervous habit she'd had since I met her. "Derek? Yes, I'm sure he'd love that. He's been managing some of our investments while you were away. Quite successfully, too." I nodded, maintaining my pleasant expression. I look forward to hearing about it. That evening, after Eleanor left for her meeting, I placed a call to Derek's cell phone. He answered on the 5th ring, his voice cautious. "Uncle Ray, you're back early." "Just got in," I lied smoothly. "Eleanor's busy tonight. Thought you might join me for a drink at the officers' lounge. Talk about those investments you've been handling." But there was a pause, during which I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "Tonight? I have a client dinner." "Tomorrow, then," I said firmly. "I insist. Been too long since we had a proper conversation." He agreed reluctantly, and I ended the call, satisfied with the first phase of my operation. Then I sat in the darkened house, activated the remote viewing app on my phone, and waited for Eleanor to return home. She arrived shortly after midnight, cheeks flushed, hair slightly disheveled. I watched through the camera feed as she moved through the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water, checking her phone repeatedly. She made a call, speaking in hushed tones. "He doesn't suspect anything," I heard her say. "No, we should continue as planned." "Yes, the account transfers. After his retirement ceremony, when everything's finalized." She laughed softly at something the person, Derek, undoubtedly said on the other end. "Patient. We've been patient for 3 years, darling. Just a little longer. 3 years. Not 2, as James had estimated. 3 years of betrayal while I commanded troops in active war zones, made life and death decisions, represented our country in foreign negotiations. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not the hot rage of jealousy, but something more dangerous. The icy precision of purpose. Over the next 3 months, I maintained the perfect facade. I smiled at Eleanor across the dinner table, discussed retirement plans, pretended to take an interest in the garden she had cultivated during my absences. I met with Derek at the officers' lounge as promised, listening attentively as he explained how he had diversified our portfolio and made strategic investments with the money I had earned leading men into battle. I watched him closely over the rim of my whiskey glass. This man I had helped raise, whose college education I had funded, whose business loan I had co-signed, looking for some sign of remorse, some indication that he felt the weight of his betrayal. There was none. just self-satisfaction and poorly concealed impatience when I discussed my plans for Eleanor and me to travel during my retirement. "You should consider staying local," he suggested, signaling the bartender for another drink. "Property values in Oakridge are excellent right now. Your investments here are significant." I nodded thoughtfully. "Speaking of investments, I'd like to review all the accounts. Now that I'm home for good, I should take a more active role." A flash of something, concern perhaps, crossed his features before he composed himself. "Of course, Uncle Ray. Though Eleanor has been handling most of the day-to-day financial matters, you know how she enjoys feeling useful while you're away." Useful. As if managing the money I earned, serving our country, was a hobby to keep her occupied, like her garden or her piano lessons. I smiled tightly and changed the subject. That night, I began phase 2 of my operation. While Eleanor slept, I used her laptop. Her password was still the name of her childhood cat, plus her birth year, unchanged for a decade despite my security warnings. I methodically went through our financial records, noting with clinical detachment the gradual siphoning of funds from our joint accounts to various investment vehicles managed by Callahan Enterprises. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Authorized transfers, signed documents, investment returns flowing back into our accounts, but always slightly less than what had gone out. Small amounts that wouldn't raise alarms if one wasn't looking closely. But I was looking very closely indeed. I documented everything, taking screenshots, saving statements to a secure cloud account only I could access. I noted dates, amounts, patterns, and I began to make my own preparations. First, I visited First National Bank of Oakridge, where the manager, a former Marine who had served under my command in Desert Storm, welcomed me enthusiastically. "General Mitchell, an honor to have you back safely, sir." I smiled warmly. "Thank you, Jenkins. I need to discuss some sensitive financial matters." In his private office, I explained that I wished to open new accounts, separate from my joint accounts with Eleanor, to manage my military pension and benefits. Jenkins processed the paperwork efficiently, asking few questions. The respect I had earned through decades of service smoothed the process considerably. Next, I arranged a private meeting with Judge Franklin Cooper, who had been a close friend since our days at the Virginia Military Institute. We met at his home office on a Sunday afternoon, Eleanor believing I was at a retirement planning seminar at Fort Braden. "Ray," Franklin greeted me, his handshake firm despite his 70 years. "What brings you to my door with that expression? Last time you looked this serious, we were facing court-martial for that incident with the commandant's car." I managed a smile at the old memory, then grew solemn. "I need legal advice, Franklin, and absolute discretion." For the next 2 hours, I laid out the situation, the betrayal, the financial maneuvers, my surveillance evidence. Franklin listened without interruption, his judicial expression revealing nothing until I finished. "What exactly are you planning, Ray?" he asked finally, leaning back in his leather chair. "Justice," I replied simply. "Not revenge, justice." Franklin considered my words carefully, his judicial mind weighing the evidence and implications. "Justice can take many forms, Ray," he said finally. "What you're describing, the surveillance, the separate accounts, skirts legal boundaries. I've spent my career operating in gray areas, Franklin," I replied, leaning forward in my chair. "I'm not asking you to do anything unethical, just to advise me on what's possible within the law." He nodded slowly, then opened a drawer in his desk and withdrew a legal pad. "Let's talk specifics." That meeting with Judge Cooper became the foundation of my strategy. We discussed property law, financial disclosure requirements, and the legal implications of infidelity in Virginia, one of the few states where adultery remains a misdemeanor criminal offense. While rarely prosecuted, its existence in the legal code provided leverage. As I drove home from Franklin's house that evening, passing the manicured lawns and colonial facades of Oakridge's most prestigious neighborhood, I felt a strange sense of calm. The military teaches you that once a battle plan is in motion, second-guessing yourself can be fatal. I had committed to my course of action. Now it was simply a matter of execution. The next phase required the most delicate touch. I needed to reconnect with Oakridge's social circles, circles that Eleanor had cultivated and maintained during my frequent absences. This wasn't simply about appearances, it was about information gathering and position strengthening. I began with the Veterans Memorial Park Committee, where I had been an honorary member for years. The monthly meeting welcomed me warmly, with Chairman Douglas Peterson personally thanking me for my service before the assembled group. "General Mitchell has given more to this country than most of us can imagine," Peterson announced to enthusiastic applause. "And now that he's home for good, we hope to see much more of him." After the meeting, I mingled purposefully, accepting congratulations on my retirement, answering questions about my final deployment. I made a point of speaking with Martha Turner, our neighbor, whose reaction upon my early return had first triggered my suspicions. "Martha," I greeted her warmly, kissing her cheek. "Eleanor tells me you've been keeping her company at those Arts Council fundraisers. I appreciate you looking after her while I was away." Martha's discomfort was palpable. "Ray, you know Eleanor is perfectly capable of looking after herself," she said with a forced laugh. "But yes, we've spent quite a bit of time together at various events. And Derek joins you sometimes, I understand," I added casually. "Good of him to escort you ladies when I couldn't be here." Martha's eyes darted away. "Derek has become quite involved in the community. His business connections have been valuable to several initiatives." I nodded thoughtfully. "I'm sure they have been." Over the following weeks, I systematically re-established my presence throughout Oakridge. I attended Sunday services at St. Mary's Church, where Reverend Phillips invited me to give a brief address about faith during wartime. I accepted invitations to speak at the local high school about military service, at the Rotary Club about leadership principles, at the Golden Oak Retirement Community about veterans' benefits. Each appearance served multiple purposes. It reinforced my standing in the community, created witnesses to my character and behavior, and most crucially, allowed me to observe how others interacted with Eleanor when we appeared together. I noted who seemed uncomfortable, who exchanged knowing glances, who suddenly found reasons to speak with me privately. Chief Michael Donovan approached me after a town council meeting where I'd been asked to consult on the Veterans Housing Initiative. "Good to have you back, General," he said, shaking my hand firmly. His eyes, a policeman's observant eyes, studied me carefully. "How's the adjustment to civilian life treating you?" "Still finding my rhythm," I admitted. 40 years of military schedule is hard to shake off." He nodded understandingly. "If you need anything at all, my door's always open to you." I heard the unspoken offer in his words. Donovan knew something, or suspected something. I filed that knowledge away for potential future use. While re-establishing my public persona, I continued my private investigation. The cameras I had installed captured countless incriminating moments between Eleanor and Derek. Sometimes they discussed me directly, their tones alternating between mockery and impatience. "How long until the pension is finalized?" Derek asked one evening when they thought I was at a VA medical appointment. In reality, I was sitting in my car 2 blocks away, watching the live feed on my secured phone. 3 more weeks, Eleanor replied, refilling their wine glasses with my imported Bordeaux. "Then everything transfers automatically to the accounts you set up. And the house? Ray's name is on the deed, but Virginia is an equitable distribution state. After 40 years of marriage, the court will likely award me at least half its value." Derek laughed. 40 years of marriage, most of which he spent in another country. "I'd argue you deserve more than half." "My lawyer agrees," Eleanor said with a smile that twisted something inside me. Not my heart, that had already gone cold, but my sense of justice. This woman who had vowed to stand by me, who had accepted every comfort my military salary could provide, was calculating her profits from our marriage's dissolution even before informing me it was over. The most revealing conversations, however, were not about money, but about their timeline. They had been waiting for my retirement, when my pension and benefits would be finalized, when my accumulated leave would be paid out, when the value of our combined assets would reach its peak. My final deployment had been an unexpected delay in their plans, pushing back their timetable by 18 months. "It was almost convenient when they extended his tour," Eleanor said once, curled against Derek on our living room sofa. "Gave us more time to arrange everything properly." The clinical coldness of their planning strengthened my resolve. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated campaign spanning years. By the 2-month mark of my return, I had accumulated extensive evidence and established my position within the community. Now it was time to set the final pieces in motion. First, I needed to create an opportunity that would seem both natural and significant. Our 40th wedding anniversary was approaching in 6 weeks, a milestone that would normally warrant celebration. During breakfast one morning, I casually raised the subject. "I've been thinking about our anniversary," I said, watching Eleanor's reaction carefully over the rim of my coffee cup. "Have you?" she replied, her tone neutral as she spread jam on her toast. "Did you have something in mind?" "I thought we might renew our vows," I suggested, "at St. Mary's, where we were married. Something meaningful to mark 40 years together." Eleanor's knife paused momentarily. "A vow renewal? That seems elaborate." "We've earned some elaboration, don't you think? After all these years apart due to my service?" I reached across the table to take her hand, feeling her almost imperceptible flinch at my touch. "I want to make it special. Invite everyone who matters to us. Show them that military marriages can endure." I saw the calculations happening behind her eyes, weighing the social pressure of refusing against the inconvenience to her plans. Finally, she smiled tightly. "That sounds lovely, Ray. Though I don't know if we can arrange something significant on such short notice. Leave the arrangements to me," I assured her. "Consider it my gift to you." The next day, I visited Reverend Phillips at St. Mary's to reserve the church. The elderly clergyman was delighted by the request. "A 40th anniversary vow renewal. What a wonderful testament to commitment," he said, marking the date in the church calendar. "Especially given your years of service away from home. Eleanor must be a remarkably strong woman." "Remarkably," I agreed, maintaining my composed expression. "We'd like to invite the congregation as well, make it a community celebration." From there, I moved with military efficiency. I hired the most exclusive caterer in Oakridge, reserved the church hall for the reception, ordered custom invitations, and personally visited key community members to ensure their attendance. I made it known throughout town that this would be a significant event, a celebration not just of our marriage, but of my retirement and return to civilian life in Oakridge. Eleanor observed these preparations with a mixture of resignation and growing anxiety. I could see her communicating frequently with Derek, their text exchanges becoming more urgent as the anniversary date approached. Twice I overheard her on the phone with him, her voice low and tense. "We need to accelerate the timeline," she whispered from the garden one afternoon, unaware that I had activated the outdoor surveillance microphone. "He's investing too much in this renewal ceremony. It will complicate things." Whatever Derek replied made her sigh in frustration. "I know the accounts aren't ready yet, but something about this feels wrong. He's too accommodating." Her instincts were sound. A lifetime as a military spouse had given Eleanor a certain awareness of strategy. She sensed a trap, but couldn't identify it, couldn't imagine that I had discovered their betrayal and was constructing an elaborate response. 3 weeks before the anniversary, I implemented the next phase of my plan. I approached Eleanor with a stack of documents, my expression serious but loving. "I've been updating my will and organizing our finances," I explained, setting the papers on the kitchen table. "With retirement, there are numerous changes to beneficiary designations, pension distributions, insurance policies. I need your signature on several forms." Eleanor hesitated, her hand hovering over the documents. "Shouldn't I read these first? Or have our lawyer review them?" I smiled reassuringly. "Most are standard military retirement forms. The lawyer has already reviewed the will changes." This was technically true. Franklin had indeed reviewed them, though not as our family lawyer, but as my confidant. But of course, read anything you like. I have nothing to hide from you, Eleanor. The subtle emphasis on my last sentence wasn't lost on her. She flipped through the papers quickly, her eyes scanning for obvious concerns, but not reading the dense legal language carefully. "Why so many changes at once?" she asked, her pen poised above the first signature line. "Military bureaucracy," I shrugged. "Everything has to be updated simultaneously when transitioning to retirement status. Health benefits, pension distribution, property designations." I pointed to specific signature lines. "These just confirm you as my primary beneficiary, as always." Some of the documents did exactly that. Others, however, contained carefully worded clauses that Judge Cooper had helped me craft. Clauses that would activate under specific conditions, clauses that Eleanor's cursory reading would miss, but that would prove legally binding. She signed each document, her elegant penmanship flowing across the designated lines. With each signature, my plan advanced another step. I thanked her warmly, gathered the papers, and took them immediately to Franklin's office for proper filing. "Are you certain about this course of action, Ray?" Franklin asked as he reviewed the signed documents. "There's still time to confront them directly, seek a more conventional resolution." I stood at his office window, looking out over Oakridge's town square, where the statue of a Revolutionary War soldier stood vigilant. "I've faced enemies across battlefields on 4 continents, Franklin. None have ever struck as deep as this betrayal. A conventional response would be inadequate." He sighed heavily but nodded. "Very well, I'll process these immediately." With the legal groundwork laid, I turned to the most delicate part of my operation, the anniversary celebration itself. I hired a professional videographer, explaining that I wanted to capture the renewal ceremony and reception for posterity. What I didn't explain was that I had specific requirements for the video equipment and presentation capabilities. 2 weeks before the ceremony, I contacted Derek directly, asking him to meet me at the Riverside Country Club. "I'd like your help with a surprise for Eleanor at the renewal ceremony," I explained over the phone. "A surprise?" he replied, his voice cautious. "What kind of surprise?" "Something special, a video presentation of our life together. I thought you might have photos from family gatherings over the years, especially from times when I was deployed." Derek agreed hesitantly, unable to find a reasonable excuse to refuse his uncle's sentimental request. We met in the country club's private dining room, where I laid out my supposed plans for a touching tribute to Eleanor. "I want to honor her patience and support through all these years," I told him, watching his face carefully for any sign of remorse. There was none, only a practiced sympathy that never reached his eyes. "That's thoughtful, Uncle Ray," he said, sipping the expensive scotch I had ordered. "I'm sure Aunt Eleanor will be moved." "I'm counting on it," I replied, raising my glass in a toast. "To family loyalty." He clinked his glass against mine, and I saw a flicker of unease cross his features. Good. Uncertainty was a powerful weapon, one I had wielded effectively in psychological operations throughout my military career. As the anniversary date drew closer, I made one final preparatory move. I visited Chief Donovan at the Oakridge Police Department, requesting a private conversation in his office. "What can I do for you, General?" he asked once we were seated behind closed doors. "I'm concerned about security for my anniversary celebration," I explained. "Given my military background and some of the operations I've led, there's always a slight risk of unwanted attention." Donovan frowned. "You've received threats?" "Nothing specific," I assured him. "Just standard protocol for someone of my rank and history. I wondered if you might have an officer present at the church and reception. Discreetly, of course." "Of course," he agreed readily. "I'll handle it personally. After what you've done for this country, it's the least we can do." I thanked him sincerely, knowing that his presence would serve multiple purposes when the time came. The evening before our anniversary, I found Eleanor in our bedroom, trying on her outfit for the ceremony, an elegant blue dress that complemented her silver hair. She started slightly when I entered, then smiled with practiced warmth. "Do you like it?" she asked, turning to show the dress from all angles. I thought blue was appropriate, since it's traditional for a bride to have something blue. You look beautiful, I said truthfully. Despite everything, Eleanor remained a striking woman, her posture military straight, from years of standing beside me at official functions. Just as beautiful as the day we married. A flicker of genuine emotion crossed her face. Nostalgia, perhaps, or a moment of doubt about the path she had chosen. Then it was gone, replaced by her social mask. Everything is ready for tomorrow, I told her. All you need to do is arrive at the church looking exactly as you do now. You've put so much effort into this renewal, she observed, watching me in the mirror as she adjusted her necklace, a diamond pendant I had given her on our 25th anniversary. I never expected you to be so sentimental about it, I smiled, meeting her eyes in the reflection. 40 years deserves proper recognition, Eleanor. I want everyone to witness exactly what our marriage means. That night I slept soundly for the first time since discovering their betrayal. Tomorrow, justice would be served. The morning of our anniversary dawned clear and bright, the Virginia sky a perfect blue that matched my dress uniform. I stood before the mirror, methodically attaching each medal and commendation to my jacket. The Bronze Star for valor in Afghanistan, the Purple Heart from the ambush in Fallujah, the Distinguished Service Medal. Each represented moments when I had faced death for my country, when I had led men through impossible situations, when I had sacrificed everything except my life itself. I adjusted my cap precisely, aligning it to regulation standards. 40 years of military discipline doesn't fade overnight. Eleanor had already left for the church. Tradition dictated the bride prepare separately, even for a vow renewal. Her sister Evelyn had picked her up 2 hours earlier, their conversation a practiced performance of excitement and sentiment that I observed with detached interest. My phone buzzed with a text from James Patterson. All set at the church? Operation Homecoming is a go. I smiled at his use of military terminology. James had been initially reluctant about my plan, concerned it might damage my standing in the community, but ultimately he understood. Some betrayals require a proportional response. The drive to St. Mary's took exactly 12 minutes. I timed my arrival for maximum impact, late enough that all guests would be seated, early enough not to create genuine concern. As my car pulled up to the church, I noted Chief Donovan's unmarked police vehicle and the catering vans at the side entrance, everything proceeding according to plan. Reverend Phillips met me at the church entrance, his aging face beaming with genuine warmth. "General Mitchell, the congregation is assembled and your bride awaits." He lowered his voice. "I must say, this renewal ceremony has generated more excitement than any wedding we've had in years. Half the town is inside. Thank you for accommodating us on relatively short notice, Reverend," I replied, straightening my already straight tie. "Anything for Oakridge's most distinguished son," he said, patting my shoulder, "and for a marriage that has withstood the test of time and service." And if only he knew. The church organ began playing as I entered, the familiar strains of trumpet voluntary filling the vaulted space. Heads turned, and the assembled crowd rose in respect, not just for the occasion, but for the uniform. I walked down the aisle with measured steps, acknowledging familiar faces with slight nods. Martha Turner, looking uncomfortable but maintaining appearances. Dr. Olivia Blackwood, who had counseled so many returning veterans, her professional gaze assessing my composed demeanor. Judge Franklin Cooper, seated prominently in the second row, gave me an almost imperceptible nod of support. At the altar stood Eleanor, radiant in her blue dress, her practiced smile firmly in place. And beside her, serving as our witness, stood Derek Callahan, my nephew and her lover, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit that likely cost more than a junior officer's monthly salary. "You look magnificent," Eleanor whispered, as I took my place beside her. "As do you," I replied quietly, a fitting image for today's memories. Reverend Phillips began the ceremony with a homily about enduring love, commitment through adversity, and the special challenges of military marriages. Eleanor maintained her serene expression throughout, though I noted a slight tension in her shoulders when the Reverend spoke about honesty as the foundation of lasting unions. When it came time to repeat our vows, I spoke the traditional promises with clear, unwavering conviction. Eleanor's voice was equally steady. She had always excelled at public performances. To the assembled congregation, we must have presented the perfect picture of mature, tested love. After the exchange of vows and rings, I had purchased a new platinum band for Eleanor, inscribed with the date. Reverend Phillips smiled broadly at the congregation. Before we conclude this beautiful reaffirmation of commitment, General Mitchell has prepared a special tribute to his bride. This was the moment I had planned for. I stepped forward slightly, addressing our friends and neighbors directly. Thank you all for joining us on this significant day. 40 years ago, Eleanor and I stood before many of you in this same church, making promises we barely understood at 22. Appreciative chuckles rippled through the congregation. Today, we renew those vows with the wisdom of experience. I turned slightly toward Eleanor, whose smile had taken on a hint of confusion. This wasn't part of the ceremony we had discussed. To honor this occasion properly, I continued, I've prepared a visual journey through our years together, a testament to our marriage and the support Eleanor has provided during my decades of service. I nodded to the audio-visual technician I had hired, a former military communications specialist who understood the importance of precise timing. The church lights dimmed, and a large screen descended from the ceiling at the front of the church. This first segment, I narrated as images began to appear, represents our early years together. The screen showed authentic photos from our youth, our wedding day, my first commission, Eleanor outside the small apartment we rented near Fort Benning. I watched her face relax slightly as these benign images played, accompanied by instrumental music that Judge Cooper's wife had helped me select for maximum emotional impact. Through multiple deployments and relocations, I continued, my voice taking on the commanding resonance that had carried across battlefields. Eleanor maintained our home front. While I was serving in Desert Storm, she was establishing herself in Oakridge community organizations. More photos appeared, Eleanor at charity events, standing beside local politicians, teaching piano to neighborhood children. Interspersed were images of me in combat zones, receiving commendations, meeting with foreign dignitaries. What the audience doesn't see in these photographs, I said, my tone shifting subtly, is what was happening behind the scenes. The sacrifices, the loneliness, the temptations that military separation creates. Eleanor's head turned sharply toward me, her eyes suddenly wary. In the second row, I noted Derek shifting uncomfortably in his seat. I'd like to share with you some more recent memories, I continued smoothly. Moments that truly capture the nature of our 40-year commitment. The screen changed to show footage from my hidden cameras, Eleanor and Derek entering our home together, timestamps clearly visible, their embraces in the kitchen, their conversations on our living room sofa, faces animated with laughter and casual intimacy. A collective gasp rose from the congregation. Eleanor froze beside me, her face draining of color. Derek half rose from his seat, then sank back down as Chief Donovan's hand fell firmly on his shoulder. For those who might have difficulty hearing, I said into the stunned silence, I've taken the liberty of adding subtitles to some of these conversations. The screen now showed Eleanor and Derek in our kitchen, wine glasses in hand, the date clearly indicating it was during my final deployment. Eleanor on screen, 2 more years until his full pension vests. Then we'll have everything we need. Derek, laughing. The old man has no idea, fighting for his country while we're planning our future with his money. The footage continued, each clip more damning than the last. Financial discussions about diverting my military savings, mockery of my dedication to service, explicit acknowledgement of their 3-year affair, and throughout it all, their calculated timeline, waiting for my retirement, for the maximum financial benefit before revealing their betrayal. I stood straight and tall beside Eleanor, my expression composed as her carefully constructed world collapsed around her. The congregation had fallen into shocked silence, broken only by occasional murmurs of disbelief or disgust. When I judged the evidence sufficiently presented, I nodded again to the technician, and the screen went dark. The church lights rose gradually, illuminating a tableau of stunned faces. "I believe in honesty," I said into the silence, my voice steady and authoritative. "I believe in honor. These are the principles that guided my military career, and they guide my personal life as well. I could not, in good conscience, renew sacred vows while allowing deception to continue." I turned to face Eleanor directly. Her face had hardened into a mask of cold fury and calculation, the true Eleanor, not the supportive military wife she had portrayed for decades. "You recorded us?" she hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "You spied on your own home?" "I gathered intelligence on enemy activity," I corrected quietly. "Standard military procedure." Before she could respond, Judge Franklin Cooper rose from his seat and approached the altar, carrying a leather portfolio. "If I may," he said, his judicial authority evident in his bearing. "General Mitchell asked me to be present today in my official capacity." He opened the portfolio and removed several documents, the papers Eleanor had signed 3 weeks earlier. "Mrs. Mitchell," Franklin addressed her formally, "these documents, which bear your signature, contain several provisions triggered by evidence of marital misconduct. Specifically, they include your acknowledgement of financial impropriety, your waiver of claims against separate property acquired through military service, and your consent to vacate the marital residence immediately upon presentation of evidence of infidelity." Eleanor's expression shifted from fury to dawning horror as she realized the full extent of my counter-offensive. She grabbed for the documents, but Franklin deftly retained possession. "These are legally binding," he continued, his tone dispassionate. "They have been properly witnessed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk. Additionally, there is the matter of potential criminal charges." At this, Chief Donovan stepped forward, his hand still firmly on Derek's shoulder. "Derek Callahan," he said officially, "I have questions regarding financial transactions between Callahan Enterprises and the Mitchell family accounts. Evidence suggests potential wire fraud, misappropriation of funds, and tax evasion. I'll need you to accompany me to the station." Derek's face had lost its aristocratic confidence, replaced by the panicked look of a man watching his carefully constructed schemes disintegrate. "Uncle Ray," he began, "there's been a misunderstanding." "Address me as General Mitchell," I interrupted coldly. "You forfeited the right to claim family connection when you betrayed everything family stands for." The congregation remained frozen in shock, witnessing a drama far beyond what they had expected from a vow renewal ceremony. I surveyed the faces, some horrified, some grimly satisfied, all completely engaged. Oakridge would remember this day for decades. I turned back to Eleanor, who stood rigidly at the altar, her social mask completely shattered. "The catering staff has been instructed to serve the reception meal as planned," I informed her with military precision. "The guests should not be deprived of refreshment due to these unfortunate revelations. You, however, have 30 minutes to collect essential personal items from Mitchell Manor before the locks are changed, as specified in the documents you signed." "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage rather than sorrow. "I am entitled to half of everything after 40 years. You were entitled to loyalty after 40 years, I corrected. You chose differently. Now so have I." I addressed the congregation once more, my posture parade ground perfect. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the unconventional nature of today's ceremony. Please proceed to the church hall for the reception. Judge Cooper, Chief Donovan, and I have some procedural matters to address first, but we will join you shortly." As if released from a spell, the assembled guests began to move, conversation erupting in an excited buzz of scandal and speculation. Eleanor remained at the altar, suddenly isolated as people who had smiled at her minutes earlier now averted their eyes or cast condemning glances. Martha Turner approached cautiously. "Do you need a ride somewhere, Eleanor?" she asked, her tone making it clear this was offered from duty rather than friendship. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, summoning the dignity she had cultivated as a military wife. "I'll manage, thank you," she replied stiffly. I watched as she walked alone down the aisle, the congregation parting before her like water around a stone. At the church door, she paused and looked back, meeting my eyes across the distance. In that moment, I saw not remorse but cold assessment, recalculating, adapting to changed circumstances, already planning her next move. I recognized that look. I had seen it on the faces of defeated opponents across negotiating tables from Baghdad to Kabul. The battle might be lost, but in their minds the war continued. Let her plan, I thought. I had anticipated this campaign for months, secured my supply lines, fortified my position, and mobilized superior forces. Whatever counterstrike she attempted would find me prepared. As Chief Donovan led Derek away for questioning and Judge Cooper organized the documentation for proper filing, James Patterson approached me, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "That," he said quietly, "was the most meticulously executed operation I've witnessed since Fallujah. Are you all right, Ray?" I considered his question seriously. Was I all right? I had just publicly exposed my wife's infidelity, legally maneuvered her out of our home and finances, and initiated criminal proceedings against my nephew. By conventional civilian standards, this was a catastrophic personal event. Yet I felt a profound sense of order restored. The enemy had been engaged and defeated. Justice had been served. "I'm fine, James," I replied truthfully. "For the first time since coming home, I'm completely fine." He nodded in understanding, the comprehension of one warrior for another. "What's your next objective, General?" I straightened my already perfect uniform and adjusted my cap to regulation angle. "Now," I said with the calm certainty that had guided my military career, "we join our guests for refreshments. The battle is won, but the mission continues." We walked together toward the church hall, where the citizens of Oakridge waited with eager curiosity to receive the returning hero who had brought the war home. The reception at St. Mary's Church Hall proceeded with an atmosphere unlike any social event Oakridge had previously witnessed. As James and I entered, the buzz of conversation momentarily halted, then resumed at a higher pitch. I moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting condolences and expressions of outrage with the same composed demeanor I had maintained through artillery bombardments and diplomatic crises. "General Mitchell," Dr. Olivia Blackwood approached, her professional concern evident. "That was quite an extraordinary scene in the church. How are you holding up?" "Quite well, Doctor," I assured her. "Clarity often brings relief, even when the truth is painful." She studied me with her therapist's gaze. "If you'd like to schedule a session in the coming days." "Thank you, but that won't be necessary," I replied. "Military training prepares one for all manner of unexpected situations." Not entirely true, perhaps, but sufficiently convincing. I had no intention of dissecting my personal circumstances in a therapeutic setting. The operation was complete. Now came the occupation phase. The caterers had indeed followed my instructions, serving the elaborate meal I had ordered weeks earlier. Crystal champagne flutes stood ready on linen-covered tables. The wedding cake, a masterpiece of white fondant and sugar flowers, waited uncut on its silver stand. The irony of celebrating a marriage immediately after its public destruction was not lost on the assembled guests, yet social conditioning held firm. People ate the expensive food, drank the premium champagne, and dissected the scandal in hushed, excited tones. Judge Cooper joined me near the cake table, a glass of sparkling water in his hand. "The documents have been formally served," he informed me quietly. "The locksmith is at Mitchell Manor now, as arranged. Your personal security detail reports that Eleanor collected some clothing and left in a taxi approximately 10 minutes ago." I nodded acknowledgement. "And Derek?" Chief Donovan has him at the station. Initial questioning revealed enough financial irregularities to justify holding him while they obtain warrants for the Callahan Enterprises records. Good, I said simply. Franklin studied me for a moment. In 40 years on the bench, I've never seen anything quite like what you orchestrated today, Ray. In 40 years of military service, I never faced betrayal of this magnitude, I countered. The response was proportional to the offense. He couldn't argue with that assessment. We stood in companionable silence, watching Oakridge's social elite navigate the unprecedented situation. Some appeared uncomfortable with their participation in what was essentially the aftermath of a public execution, social rather than physical, but an execution nonetheless. Others seemed energized by the drama, already reconstructing the events into a narrative they could share for years to come. Martha Turner approached cautiously, her husband Thomas at her side. "Ray," she began hesitantly, "I feel I should apologize. I noticed certain patterns when you were deployed, but I never said anything." "There's no need for apologies, Martha," I assured her. "Observation without actionable intelligence is simply data collection." Thomas, a retired engineer who had always appreciated my precise manner, nodded in agreement. "What will you do now, General? Will you stay in Oakridge?" It was a question that held significance beyond mere curiosity. Would I remain among them as a living reminder of scandal, or would I disappear, allowing the community to gradually normalize? "Mitchell Manor has been my anchor point for 40 years, I replied deliberately. "I see no reason to abandon a strategic position simply because the terrain has shifted." This seemed to satisfy them. The Turners moved on, replaced by a steady stream of well-wishers and information seekers throughout the afternoon. I maintained my composed facade, sipping occasionally from a glass of whiskey, accepting condolences with dignified nods. To all observers, I appeared to be weathering betrayal with admirable military stoicism. Eventually, as social protocol demanded, I approached the wedding cake. Tradition dictated that Eleanor and I should cut it together, feeding each other the first symbolic bites. Her absence created a procedural dilemma that momentarily disrupted the artificial normality of the reception. I solved it with characteristic decisiveness, picking up the silver cake knife and addressing the room. "Under the circumstances, we'll dispense with certain traditions," I announced. "However, I see no reason why excellent pastry should go to waste. Please, enjoy." I made a single, precise cut through the bottom tier, then handed the knife to the catering staff to complete the service. The tension broke as guests laughed nervously, grateful for the clear direction amid social uncertainty. As the reception wound down, James Patterson remained at my side, a loyal executive officer to the end. "My wife suggests you join us for dinner this evening," he offered. "She thinks you shouldn't be alone at Mitchell Manor tonight." "Please thank Elizabeth for her concern," I replied, "but I prefer to secure my position personally. The first night in reclaimed territory is always the most critical." James understood the military metaphor. "At least let me drive you home." I accepted this compromise, and an hour later, James's car pulled into the circular driveway of Mitchell Manor. The locksmith's van was gone. My security detail, 2 former rangers who now worked in private contracting, confirmed the property was clear, and James departed after a final confirmation that I didn't require additional support. Alone in the house for the first time since executing my counteroffensive, I conducted a methodical inspection. The master bedroom showed signs of Eleanor's hasty packing, drawers partially open, empty hangers in the closet, her favorite silver-backed hairbrush gone from the vanity. In the adjoining bathroom, the absence of her expensive French perfumes left conspicuous spaces on the marble counter. I removed my dress uniform with the same precision with which I had donned it that morning, hanging each piece carefully in my closet. The medals clinked softly against each other as I placed the jacket on its padded hanger. Sounds of honor in a house that had seen precious little of that quality in recent years. Dressed in civilian clothes, khaki trousers and a navy polo shirt, I descended to the kitchen, where I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon and carried the glass to the living room. The same living room where Eleanor and Derek had laughed together, where they had plotted, where they had betrayed every principle I had spent my life defending. I sat in my leather armchair, the one possession Eleanor had never tried to replace during her periodic redecorating campaigns, and considered the day's outcomes. Operationally, it had been an unqualified success. The primary objectives had been achieved with precision and effectiveness. Eleanor had been removed from Mitchell Manor with minimal resistance. Derek was facing criminal investigation. The financial assets were secured. Even the secondary objective, maintaining my standing in the Oakridge community, had been accomplished through careful management of public perception. By any military metric, the mission was a complete success. Yet as I sat in the quietness of the house, listening to the familiar creaks and settling sounds of the old structure, I confronted the reality that successful operations don't always bring peace. I had won the battle decisively, but victory carried its own weight. 40 years of marriage, even one undermined by betrayal, leaves marks on a life that can't be erased by tactical success. The empty spaces where Eleanor's possessions had been. The muscle memory of turning to share an observation with someone no longer there. The ingrained habits of a partnership, however flawed, suddenly rendered obsolete. My satellite phone rang, interrupting this uncharacteristic moment of reflection. The screen showed a number I recognized, General Howard Phillips, my former commanding officer and longtime mentor. "Mitchell," I answered, automatically straightening my posture despite being alone. "Ray," Phillips's gravelly voice came through clearly. "Just got off the phone with James Patterson. He filled me in on today's events." I waited, neither defending nor explaining my actions. Phillips had taught me that unnecessary elaboration often undermines command authority. "Hell of a thing," he continued after a moment. 40 years. I remember standing with you at that altar back in '84. You were so damn young, both of you." "Yes, sir," I acknowledged, the respectful address coming automatically, though Phillips had retired 5 years before me. "James seems to think you executed this with unnecessary public display," Phillips said bluntly. "Says you could have handled it privately, avoided the community spectacle." I considered this assessment carefully. "Deterrence requires visible consequences, sir. You taught me that in Kosovo." Phillips grunted, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. "Different kind of battlefield, son. Same principles," I countered. "Betrayal met with proportional response. Clear messaging to prevent future incursions." "And the collateral damage?" he asked sharply. "The impact on your own position?" This was the question I had been privately considering before his call. Acceptable. Strategic position secured, financial assets protected. Community standing maintained through transparency rather than concealment. There was a long pause on the line. Finally, Phillips sighed heavily. "You always were the most coldly logical officer under my command, Ray. I used to consider that an asset." "You disapprove of my tactics," I stated rather than asked. "I understand them," he corrected. "That doesn't mean I wouldn't have advised a different approach. Less shock and awe, more diplomatic resolution." "Diplomacy failed during the intelligence gathering phase," I replied. "The opposition showed no interest in negotiation or honorable withdrawal." Phillips laughed suddenly, a short bark of genuine amusement. "Listen to us discussing your marriage breakdown like it was a military campaign." "It was," I said simply, "just not one I anticipated fighting." Another silence stretched between us, filled with the unspoken understanding of men who had seen combat together. "What's your next move, General?" Phillips finally asked, echoing James's earlier question. I gazed around the living room, the space I had reclaimed through decisive action. Consolidation of position, assessment of long-term strategic goals, now that the immediate threat has been neutralized. "In plain English, Ray," Phillips demanded. "I don't know yet," I admitted, allowing a rare moment of uncertainty. For 40 years, my life followed a clear operational pattern. Even Eleanor's betrayal provided a defined objective once discovered. Now you're in uncharted territory. Phillips finished for me. Join the club. Retirement hits all of us hard, even without the additional complications you're facing. We spoke for another 15 minutes. Phillips sharing his own post-military adjustments and offering practical advice about moving forward. When we ended the call, I felt something I hadn't expected, a sense of connection that had nothing to do with rank or military structure. The remainder of that evening passed quietly. I prepared a simple meal, ate at the kitchen island rather than the formal dining room, and reviewed the security measures I had implemented throughout the property. By 2200 hours, 10 p.m. in civilian time, I had completed my evening routine and retired to the master bedroom, now stripped of Eleanor's presence. Sleep came surprisingly easily, perhaps because the constant vigilance of the past 3 months had finally eased. The immediate mission was complete. Whatever came next would require different strategies. I awoke at 0500, decades of military schedule embedded in my body's rhythms. After a 5-mile run through the quiet streets of Oakridge, I returned to Mitchell Manor, showered and dressed in casual but precise civilian attire. At 0730, my phone rang, Chief Donovan providing an update on Derek's situation. "We've seized the Callahan Enterprises financial records," he reported. "Preliminary review confirms systematic diversion of your investment funds. The district attorney is reviewing the case for potential criminal charges." "Thank you, Chief," I responded. "Will you require additional statements from me?" "Eventually, but nothing urgent. We have enough to proceed for now." He paused, then added, "For what it's worth, General, my father served under your command in Desert Storm. He always said you were the most straightforward officer he ever knew." Yesterday confirmed his assessment. After ending the call, I stood at the kitchen window, looking out over the precisely maintained garden that Eleanor had supervised for decades. The roses were beginning to bloom, red ones, which I had always preferred, though Eleanor had argued for more delicate pinks and yellows. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. On the security monitor, I saw Martha Turner standing on the front porch, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish. The community support phase had begun, right on schedule. I opened the door, greeting Martha with a composed smile. "Good morning." "I brought breakfast," she said, lifting the dish. "My mother's recipe for breakfast casserole. I thought you might appreciate something homemade today." "Very thoughtful," I acknowledged, stepping back to allow her entry. "Coffee." As Martha moved comfortably into my kitchen, a space she had visited countless times during neighborhood gatherings, I recognized the beginning of a new operational phase. Oakridge was rallying around its wounded warrior, incorporating yesterday's dramatic events into a narrative they could understand and support. Over the next hours, similar visitors arrived. James and Elizabeth Patterson brought fresh bread from the bakery downtown. Reverend Phillips stopped by with church bulletins and carefully phrased spiritual support. Even Dr. Blackwood appeared, ostensibly to deliver information about a veteran support group, but clearly conducting her own assessment of my mental state. I received them all with military courtesy, accepting their support without displaying vulnerability, maintaining the persona they expected from General Raymond Mitchell. By mid-afternoon, when the stream of visitors finally ebbed, I had confirmed my position within the community structure, not as a pitiable victim, but as a man of principle who had confronted betrayal with strength and clarity. That evening, alone again in Mitchell Manor, I stood before the wall of photographs in my home office. Images of my military career, commissioning ceremony, combat deployments, diplomatic assignments, retirement parade. Interspersed were photographs with Eleanor, her smile consistent across decades, while her eyes grew increasingly distant. I removed these images methodically, placing them in a storage box rather than destroying them. Erasure wasn't my objective. Reorganization was. 40 years shouldn't be eliminated, but they could be properly categorized, historical documentation rather than ongoing narrative. In their place, I hung photographs that represented my individual achievements and connections. My graduation from the War College, meetings with 3 different presidents, standing with James Patterson after a successful mission in classified territory. The modified display represented my new reality, not a life shattered by betrayal, but one reconfigured around the core principles that had always guided me: duty, honor, personal integrity. Eleanor and Derek had assumed these were merely professional values I left behind when returning to civilian life. Their fundamental miscalculation had been failing to recognize that for men like me, these aren't simply occupational guidelines, but the foundation of existence itself. As I made these adjustments to my surroundings, I received a text message from an unknown number. It contained only 7 words. "This isn't over. You'll regret this decision." Eleanor or Derek, it hardly mattered which. The message confirmed what I had already anticipated. A counterattack was being planned. But they were operating from a position of weakness now. Their resources diminished, their credibility damaged. Whatever they attempted would be the desperate action of a defeated force rather than a strategic offensive. I deleted the message without responding. No engagement was the strongest response to such transparent attempts at psychological warfare. That night, as I prepared for sleep in the reclaimed territory of Mitchell Manor, I reflected on the path that had brought me to this point. 40 years of military service, 40 years of marriage, both now concluded, though in drastically different ways. One with honor and recognition, the other with betrayal and decisive response. What remained was not the emptiness I might have expected, but a sense of clarity. I had defended what mattered, not just material assets or social position, but the principles that defined my existence. In doing so, I had demonstrated to myself and to Oakridge that Raymond Mitchell was not merely a uniform and rank, but a man of unwavering conviction regardless of the battlefield. As sleep approached, I found myself recalling something my first commanding officer had told me as a newly commissioned lieutenant. The true measure of a soldier isn't how he performs when everything goes according to plan. It's how he adapts when the situation deteriorates beyond recognition. By that standard, I could face whatever came next with confidence. The betrayal had been identified, confronted, and decisively addressed. The next phase of operations, whatever form it might take, would find me prepared, as always. Looking back on everything that transpired, I still find myself amazed at how 40 years of marriage can unravel so completely, yet so precisely. When I returned from that final deployment, I was prepared for many challenges, adjusting to civilian life, finding purpose beyond military service, reconnecting with a community that knew me more by reputation than presence. What I never anticipated was discovering that the enemy had been in my own home all along. The betrayal cut deeper than any combat wound I'd ever sustained. Eleanor, my wife of 4 decades, and Derek, my own nephew, who I had helped raise after my sister's death, conspiring not just in infidelity, but in financial exploitation, mocking my service while planning to profit from it. 3 years they had carried on their affair, waiting patiently for my retirement when the financial benefits would be at their peak. But they underestimated me severely. They forgot, or perhaps never truly understood, that military intelligence training doesn't simply vanish when the uniform comes off. The careful surveillance, the meticulous documentation, the strategic patience, the precisely timed counterstrike, these weren't just professional skills I'd developed, they were integral to who I am. The vow renewal ceremony I orchestrated wasn't merely a venue for public exposure. It was a calculated operation designed to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously, legally securing my assets through the documents Eleanor unwittingly signed, creating a community witness base to prevent any counter-narrative she might attempt, and ensuring Derek faced proper consequences for his financial manipulations. The public nature of the exposure wasn't motivated by vindictiveness, but by strategic necessity. As my former commanding officer, General Phillips, questioned, was the community spectacle truly necessary? In my assessment, absolutely. Deterrence requires visible consequences. The people of Oakridge needed to see justice delivered clearly and definitively. No whispered rumors, no opportunity for Eleanor and Derek to control the narrative or paint themselves as victims. What surprised me most in the aftermath wasn't the community's reaction. Their rallying around me was predictable, given the established patterns of social behavior in military towns like Oakridge. No, what caught me unprepared was my own internal response once the operation was complete. The empty spaces in Mitchell Manor, the silence where Eleanor's voice should have been, the strange disorientation of achieving a perfect tactical victory while confronting a strategic uncertainty about what comes next. Military life provides clear objectives, defined parameters, established chains of command. Even the exposure of Eleanor and Derek's betrayal offered a temporarily defined mission. But in the quiet aftermath, I found myself in truly uncharted territory. Not broken. I've weathered far worse in combat zones across 4 continents, but recalibrating. Adjusting my internal navigation to a landscape fundamentally altered by betrayal and its consequences. The threatening message I received that night, "This isn't over. You'll regret this decision," might have intimidated someone else, but after facing down insurgents, warlords, and enemy combatants, the desperate threats of disgraced civilians held little power. Eleanor and Derek had lost their primary advantages: secrecy and my trust. Whatever counterattack they might attempt would come from a position of weakness against an opponent who had already proven his superior tactical thinking. In the days that followed, I discovered something unexpected, a sense of liberation. The weight of unknowing had been lifted. The vague suspicions, the inconsistencies I'd noticed but dismissed out of loyalty, all replaced by clear, actionable intelligence and decisive response. Mitchell Manor, once compromised by deception, had been secured. My financial assets, once targeted for exploitation, were protected. My standing in the Oakridge community, potentially vulnerable to scandal, was instead reinforced by transparency and principled action. If there's a lesson in my experience, and military men are trained to extract learning from every operation, successful or failed, it's that principles must be non-negotiable, regardless of the context. The same honor, integrity, and clarity that guided my military career served me equally well in confronting personal betrayal. Eleanor and Derek assumed those values were merely professional affectations, left behind when I returned from deployment. Their fundamental miscalculation was failing to recognize that for men like me, these aren't simply occupational guidelines, but the foundation of existence itself. Now, if you've stayed with my story this long, I want to thank you for listening to this difficult chapter of my life. It wasn't easy to relive these moments of betrayal and justice, but sharing them serves a purpose beyond mere catharsis. These experiences might help someone else recognize the warning signs I missed, or find the strength to respond decisively when faced with similar betrayal. If my story has resonated with you in any way, I ask that you subscribe to the Revenge Expected channel right now. Each week, we share stories of justice served, moments when betrayal and deception meet their match in careful planning and principled action. Our community understands that true revenge isn't about emotional outbursts, but about calculated responses that restore balance and dignity. The support from viewers like you allows us to continue finding and sharing these powerful stories of justice. Take a moment to like this video so the algorithm helps others find it too. More importantly, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Would you have handled this situation differently? Do you think my response was proportional to the betrayal? Have you experienced something similar in your own life? Your comments create a valuable discussion that helps everyone in our community. I read every single comment personally. Your perspectives matter to me and to everyone who comes to this channel seeking understanding and validation after experiencing betrayal. The community we're building here stands for accountability and justice in a world where those qualities often seem in short supply. If you found value in this channel, please consider supporting our work through the Gracias donation button below. Creating these videos requires significant resources, from research to production to editing. Your financial support, even a small amount, helps cover these costs and allows us to deliver new content daily. Without the generous support of viewers like you, maintaining this quality and frequency would be impossible. Before you leave, take a moment to browse our other videos. From workplace betrayals to family deceptions, from financial exploitation to romantic treachery, each story offers unique insights into how justice can be achieved through careful planning and principled action. Many viewers tell me they found strategies they could apply to their own situations by watching multiple episodes. This isn't just a channel. It's a resource for anyone who has faced betrayal and wondered how to respond effectively rather than emotionally. It's for those who believe, as I do, that principles must be defended, that loyalty is sacred, and that those who violate trust must face appropriate consequences. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Revenge Expected. I'm General Raymond Mitchell, and I hope my experience has offered you both compelling storytelling and practical wisdom. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, and support through Gracias if you're able. Together, we're building a community that values integrity and justice above all. Until next time, stand firm in your principles. They're your strongest defense in a world where betrayal can come from those closest to you.